After my divorce, I bought a new house to start over. It's small but nice, with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and it sits on a large lot that gives me plenty of space to relax outside. The garden is simple, and the quiet street makes me feel safe. After I moved in, I started to notice strange noises at night, especially in the laundry room. At first, I told myself that these noises were normal for an old house because it was built in 1974, but they persisted and kept happening every night. After a few months, I got to know my neighbors. I was busy with my own life, enjoying being single and living alone, but they were very interested in me and wanted to know more about me. I generally avoided becoming involved in neighborhood drama by going to work and returning home, but one evening, when I was outside gathering dandelions, I asked the neighbors to the west if they had any information on the previous occupants of my property. One day, Sandy and I started talking about the house's previous owner, a nice old woman who lived here before me. She was known to be a bit of a recluse, mostly keeping to herself and collecting a lot of things, almost like a pack rat. Her name is Sandy, and she is an attractive, amiable older woman. Jim, her husband, is a retired construction worker who used to operate heavy equipment. Sandy explained that the neighbors became concerned when they noticed that the elderly woman had not been seen in her backyard for a few days. She usually spent time there caring for her garden every day, so the neighbors decided to do a wellness check. They went to her house to make sure she was safe and well, and they discovered her sitting in a recliner. It appeared that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep, which is the most important thing because I knew her name and I frequently talked to her about whatever was on my mind. Perhaps I should have approached her in that way, but I can't be certain. One day, after a long, stressful day at work, I returned home feeling worn out and frustrated from handling too many truck drivers on the job. Their container was the most important one in the yard, and handling it all day left me exhausted. When I got home, I took a long, hot shower to relieve my stress, and afterward, I made a simple dinner that made me feel better from the inside out. I then turned on one of those old-fashioned TVs, which was playing classic sitcom shows from the 1960s and 1970s, and the last thing I remember before falling asleep was Andy Taylor saying something like, "Not all that glitters is gold." I settled into my recliner with the TV on, and soon after, I was startled awake by a loud noise. I heard old pots and pans that I had kept on a shelf in the laundry room fall to the floor, and as I passed the kitchen, I saw that the microwave clock read 3:33 a.m. I looked again and remembered that this time was important. It matched the month and year my father was born. A shiver ran down my spine and I felt both confused and curious. I slowly moved toward the laundry room door. I listened carefully for any sounds, maybe a soft voice or footsteps on the floor, but the house was completely quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. When I reached the laundry room, I switched on the light. The room was dim at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw a strange sight. All the pots and pans that I had stored neatly on the shelf were now scattered on the floor. They lay in a jumble, some close together and others far apart, as if something had knocked them over in a hurry. I picked up the pots and pans and put them back where they belonged. Then I went back to my room to try to sleep, even though I still had about an hour and a half before work started. Once I laid down, I couldn't fall back asleep since I was wide awake. I got up and made myself a warm cup of coffee. I started getting ready for work, slowly taking my time because I still had plenty of time before I needed to leave. My parents were searching for a vacation property, Instead of purchasing a Hamptons waterfront home, they chose to purchase a haunted 18th century farmhouse in upstate New York. The farmhouse is on 100 acres of land and has 7 bedrooms. There is also a tenant house that is split into 2 parts so that male and female servants could live separately, along with several other small buildings on the property. And there was a small 1-room schoolhouse built many years ago. It had a little dome on top called a cupola, and inside that cupola hung a big bell that used to ring when it was time for class. Not far from the schoolhouse there was a huge barn made of old wood. The barn was so large that it had beautiful mahogany stalls for the horses. Each stall shone nicely when the sunlight hit it. We were told that long ago, during the French and Indian War, fierce battles were fought on this land. In another part of its history, the property even served as a stagecoach, and travelers on long journeys would stop there to rest, share meals, and tell stories of far-off places. The house itself had a very heavy and gloomy feeling. It was as if the old spirits and memories of past events were still there, watching every move. You constantly felt like someone or something was looking at you from the dark corners. On a lovely summer day, I was alone in the living room watching TV. My mom and siblings had gone shopping, so I was watching I Love Lucy on one of the few TV channels available when I suddenly felt a heavy, uneasy feeling as if someone was watching me. Years later, I discovered that my brother had gone through the same thing and had reacted similarly. The first strange and inexplicable event occurred in my bedroom, which had 2 twin beds. My mom and I were the only ones home that weekend, and she was sleeping in the other bed when I woke up at dawn to the sound of sheets shifting on her bed. The sound was strong and constant, filling the silent room with a constant rustling. You have to realize that this house was so large that even if something as loud as a bomb went off in the kitchen, I probably wouldn't have heard it from my room. I lay there for a moment, feeling scared and confused, trying to figure out what was making that sound. I slowly rolled over to see what was happening, and there was no one in the bed. In the beginning, I thought maybe my mom was making my brother's bed in his room, which shared a wall with mine, but she wasn't there at all. She was in the kitchen. My mother, who never believed in ghosts, once chose to sleep in my bedroom when she was alone at home. In the middle of the night, she felt a heavy object settle on the corner of her bed and push on the mattress. When she looked closely, she noticed that the mattress was pushed down as if someone had actually sat there. She was shocked and perplexed by the experience, as the room was completely silent save for the sound of her own rapid breathing and the gentle rustle of the bed linens. At first, she thought she might be dreaming or that her mind was playing tricks on her. We lived in this house for many years, and a lot of weird things happened there. There was also a haunted restaurant in town called the Bull's Head Inn, but we didn't go there much because it was very pricey, and I never saw anything weird happen there myself. However, there are rumors that the bar was constructed in an old woman's bedroom, and that she was a part of the temperance movement, which meant she disapproved of drinking alcohol. According to the story, she would throw cocktail napkins around, and some even broke glasses. Last year, after finishing high school, I moved to a new city. I spent a lot of time looking at different colleges and finally chose one that was about 3 hours away from my old town. I decided to live on my own, so I searched for an apartment and found a small place where I didn't have to share with anyone. The apartment was in a safe neighborhood with friendly neighbors, and the rent was affordable enough for me. It was also near several parks, cafes, in a shopping area for the first 4 months. Everything was great. I felt completely safe and there were no problems at all. And during this time, I became good friends with a guy who went to the same college as me, and he lived only about 5 minutes away from my apartment, so we often visited each other's places. Then one night, just as winter was beginning, he called me and invited me over to hang out and play video games. When I arrived at his place, we set up our gaming console and started a new game. We talked about our classes, shared random funny stories, and enjoyed listening to music in the background. At about 1 a.m. we decided to finish up and I went back to my apartment. Once inside, I went out onto the balcony that overlooked the building's entrance to smoke. I remember looking around and noticing that there was no one else outside. It was a very cold winter night, and since it wasn't the weekend, everyone was already in their homes. I could see only 1 or 2 cars slowly passing by on the empty street. The quiet made the night feel even colder and more peaceful. I decided to call it a night and began getting ready for bed. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and turned off the lights in my room. Just then I heard a short ring at my doorbell. I paused in the middle of my room for several seconds as I wondered who could be there at this late hour. I tiptoed to the door and leaned in close, listening carefully to see if I could hear anyone outside. Now my first thought was that maybe my friend had come over to drop off something I might have forgotten, but then I remembered he usually texts or calls first if he's coming over. I listened for about half a minute until the person rang the doorbell again and knocked a couple times lightly. I stood very still, trying not to make any noise that might reveal I was at the door. I could hear the stranger moving around inside the apartment for a few seconds before he stopped. I waited carefully for any sound, but everything stayed quiet. My heart pounded as I lifted the cover and peered outside. My legs felt weak and almost numb when I saw a dark hooded figure staring right back at me. The figure's face was mostly covered by the hood, and he was holding the zipper of his hoodie in a way that covered his face, so all I could see was his forehead and his eyes. It seemed as if he had noticed something, either the sound of the peephole cover or my heavy, nervous breathing. In an instant he moved away from the peephole. His sudden motion startled me, and then he spoke in a cold, low voice, saying, "I know you're at the door." His words sent a chill down my spine. I stood there frozen and filled with dread, but I found the courage to say, "I'm calling the cops, man." He just laughed and replied, "Sure thing, big guy." Then he wiped the door handle with his sleeve before walking away. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, they told me I wasn't the only one he had bothered. Apparently, he had been doing this for at least a month, and the police suspected him of a home invasion to a case where a father had chased him out of a house. I stayed at my friend's house for about a week after that night, because I didn't feel safe going back to my apartment right away. During that time, I kept thinking about what had happened, replaying the moment in my head over and over. The stranger's voice, his creepy laugh, and the way he covered his face with his hoodie. It all stuck with me. A year has gone by and I still haven't heard anything about him, so I believe it's more likely that he simply moved to a different area to continue doing the same thing somewhere. I kept checking the news in the hopes of hearing something about him getting caught, but there was nothing, and eventually I started to feel normal again, even though the memory never truly goes away. When I was growing up, I lived in a small farmhouse on 2 acres of land. Our home was not a busy farm, but many different animals came to stay with us over the years. We had cats, dogs, chickens, rabbits, and even a few farm animals that visited. My mother was a kind veterinarian who spent much of her free time helping animals. She cared for sick, hurt, or mistreated animals and found them new homes where they could be safe and loved. Our home was quiet and peaceful, with birds singing and wildlife all around. reminding us that we were not in a city. There was also a walking trail in the woods behind our house, and during the warmer months, tourists, hikers, and campers often used the trail. Now I loved reading books and spent a lot of time in our barn. The barn was located at the back of our property along the fence, and I spent many hours there taking care of the animals and reading all my books, so sometimes I could hear people talking and laughing as they walked along the trail. When I was 10 years old, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom finished work. I was a responsible kid, so my mom trusted me to catch the bus and start on my chores without any help. That day, as usual, I hopped off the school bus, opened the front gate by myself, and walked up the dirt driveway toward our house. When I stepped inside, I went straight to the kitchen where I made myself an after-school snack. I prepared a good old-fashioned peanut butter and jelly sandwich and poured a cold glass of milk. Then I took my snack and went out the back door, heading toward the barn. I knew my afternoon routine very well. Usually our dogs would run up to greet me, barking and circling around my legs with their tails wagging happily, but today I didn't see them anywhere. I called for them, but they didn't come. Instead, I heard soft, muffled barking coming from the barn. That was very strange, because we never locked the dogs in the barn. During the day they stayed outside, and at night they slept with us inside the house. I placed my snack on an old rough tree stump near the barn. Then I walked slowly to the barn door and carefully opened it to see if the dogs were okay. As soon as I opened the door, all 3 dogs burst out running happily with their tails wagging. I knelt down and petted them, relieved to see that they were all fine. After they had greeted me, I looked inside the barn from the doorway, and there was no one else. Maybe my mom had locked the dogs in that morning for some reason, or perhaps the wind had blown the barn door shut and they went inside. I didn't worry too much. I picked up my snack and sat on a bale of hay inside the barn. The dogs sat at my feet while I shared small pieces of my sandwich with them. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, thin man with long, messy gray hair walking right past the barn entrance. I could hear him making strange babbling sounds. His voice was low and odd, like he was speaking in a language I had never heard before. Oddly, my dogs did not react as they normally would. Instead of barking or running over to investigate, they glanced toward the door where the man had walked by. They wagged their tails a couple of times, almost as if they were curious, but then went back to sitting near me. Normally, when a stranger comes onto our property, my dogs jump up, bark loudly, and rush over. A small bit of fear tugged at my stomach, but not too much, because I was just a kid and my dogs looked happy. I tiptoed to the doorway and peeked around to get a closer look at him. He was very tall and so thin that you could see his ribs and spine sticking out. His hair was messy like a rat's nest, and his beard was just as untidy. Now he was bending over our chicken coop, and I guessed he was searching for eggs. He pulled an egg out and stopped his strange babbling, studying the egg for a long time. Then he whispered something softly to the egg that I couldn't understand. I strained to hear his words, but they were lost in the air. Then, without any warning, he picked up the egg with his hands and put the whole thing into his mouth. I watched in shock as he bit down hard. I noticed that he was missing his front teeth and his mouth was oddly shaped. As he chomped, the yellow yolk began to spill out, slowly running down his chin and neck. I could see him grinding his jaw as he chewed, and the crunch of the hard shell. My stomach twisted and I wanted to vomit or scream, but I was completely frozen in place. When I finally snapped out of my shock, I screamed so loudly that the man turned his head to look at me. He didn't stop what he was doing, he just kept eating. I ran out of the barn as fast as I could, my feet splashing in the wet green grass. I climbed the back wooden steps quickly and rushed into the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. My heart was pounding hard in my chest and I felt terrified. I was very scared for my dogs and felt guilty for leaving them outside with that man. I pulled the small white curtain away from the window on the door and carefully looked outside to see if my dogs were safe outside. In the middle of our yard, I saw the strange man standing still. He was staring hard at our back door, and to my shock, my dogs were calmly licking small bits of raw egg from his fingertips as if they thought he was a friend, even though the man seemed. Since my dogs were nice and didn't show signs of fear, I felt quite frightened and knew I needed to contact for assistance immediately to avoid a worse situation. I grabbed for the phone. As I hurriedly dialed my mother's work number, I heard the man begin babbling loudly once more. The strange babbling seemed to be getting closer, and I trembled even more, making it difficult for me to speak. When my mother answered in a shaky voice, I managed to say that I needed help and that there was a man on our property. She told me to go upstairs right away, and I slowly climbed the stairs, following her instructions exactly in the hopes that help would arrive soon. At that point, my mom abruptly ended the call and called the police. I heard the man's heavy footsteps as he stomped up the back steps. Once I reached my room, I locked the door just as my mom had told me. I then crawled under the bed, making sure not even one toe peeked out. The space under the bed was dark and cold, and I could barely breathe as I listened to the loud banging on the door. I lay there shaking and quiet, hoping that the noise would stop soon and that I would be safe. I kept thinking about the school holidays coming in a few weeks. I really did not want to be gone. When they arrived, the man walked around the outside of the house. I heard him banging on the windows, making odd, frustrated noises and yelling words that I couldn't understand, probably at me, but he clearly wanted to come inside, and I was waiting for a window to shatter or for him to kick in the back door. When you're scared, time seems to slip away, and I lost track of how long I hid and listened to him, but it didn't feel like long before I heard the police arrive. I could hear the wailing sirens and the sound of their radio coming closer. Soon I heard them talking to the strange man outside. They asked him questions in a firm, clear voice, but he didn't answer them. Instead, his babbling grew louder and sounded more panicked, like he was really scared. Feeling a bit safer now that the police were there, I slowly crept downstairs and carefully moved to the window to look outside. I could see the flashing lights of the police cars and hear the officers' voices in the light. I saw my mother running down the long dirt driveway. She looked very panicked. Her face was pale, and she moved quickly as she burst through the door, clearly desperate to get to me and bring me to safety. My mom wouldn't stop hugging and kissing me while the police asked me questions about what had happened. I felt a bit embarrassed because I was trying to explain everything, and she was so worried that she kept showing her love in front of everyone. Soon after, more police arrived as backup. They took the man with them to the police station, and I remember watching as he was led away in handcuffs. About a week later, the same two police officers returned to our house. They came back to speak with us again and to give my mom an update on the investigation. The police explained that the man on our property had been secretly living in our barn at night and hiding in the woods during the day for a few months. Many people had seen him on the trail during the summer. He was homeless, but he was not usually dangerous. This is why my dogs did not seem afraid of him. They had become friends with him. The police also said that he had health problems and had been in and out of the hospital many times. They explained that the man had started hiding in our barn when the weather began to get colder because he had nowhere else to go. He was a sick man, struggling with his health and trying to survive on his own. Over the years, many people had seen him on the trail during the summer, and my dogs had grown used to him. They saw him as a friend because he treated them kindly. This story does not end with that frightening night. My mother's kindness made a difference, and Jim's story ended peacefully when I attended his funeral 27 years later. At that time, the man we called Jim had finally received the help he needed. With my mother's support and care, he received treatment for his health issues and learned how to take better care of himself. Jim also started taking his medication again and started receiving his disability pension. My mother also helped him find a small place to live in town and even paid the security deposit so he could rent it. Jim then started helping out on our property, volunteering to care for the animals with my mother and me. Later, he earned a few paid hours each week at the vet clinic, where he helped clean and maintain the area. Even though Jim frightened us a lot and had no one in his life, he ended up making a big lasting impact on all of us, especially the animals. Sometimes when you meet someone who seems creepy, you think you'll never want to see someone like that again, but most of the time that feeling is normal. Jim deserved another chance. He wasn't a bad or mean person, he just needed someone to help him get back to a normal life. Jim was a sick man who occasionally had bad episodes, but overall, his final days went fairly well. He made friends in town and received support from his community, and he found a job and a home, and there were always people around to help him. We started by removing all the carpet and priming the walls so they were ready to be painted before we moved our belongings from the old house. First, I set up my air mattress in the living room. When we started removing the carpet, I moved upstairs into the bedroom that my wife and I would share, and that's when strange things started to happen. I moved in at the end of October, but my wife, kids, and pets didn't join me until the end of December. I spent many nights alone in an empty house. I thought I saw a shadowy figure in the corner, but my vision isn't the best. One night, I felt like someone was watching me, and I heard a light turn on and off by itself. I moved my air mattress downstairs, and I told my wife about it, but she didn't take it seriously. After a week or so, nothing happened, so I assumed I was just being paranoid. I sent my wife a picture on Snapchat with the caption, "It's easier to sleep with a sword," and I moved my air mattress back into the bedroom, since it was the only room with carpet. In the middle of the night, I felt like something jumped into bed with me and cuddled close to me, nearly knocking me off my air mattress. I was afraid to sleep without multiple lights on, and I felt safer with the bedroom door. I informed the spirit that I was afraid and prayed for protection after locking it. I even joked with it, "Enjoy the house while I'm at work every time I leave." After that, nothing much occurred for long, just some gentle, odd motions. The spirit didn't seem cruel, more like a mischievous ghost. One day before school started, my son was using a powered movie theater seat when our cat Asuna got her tail stuck in it. It was really bad, so my son called me at work, so I rushed home. When I got there, I broke the chair and its mechanism while attempting to free her tail, which was broken in several places and looked awful. A few months later, my son moved in early, which was nice. I haven't told him about the strange things I experienced. We also brought our cats upstairs, and it's fun to watch them explore. By then, the veterinarian had shaved her tail. My cat never purrs unless my middle son is with her and he wasn't there, but one night she jumped onto my bed and started making strange noises and purring, getting very close to my face. I decided to record it so I could show my child and laugh about it. When I played the video back right after I said, "Get your rat tail out of my face," I heard a clear laugh in the background. I still get goosebumps every time I think about the 3 touching events that happened in my room. I moved into a 1924 house 2 months ago, and since then, I've had a few strange experiences that I can't explain. One night, I woke up feeling uneasy, but I didn't know why, so I went to the bathroom and then to the kitchen for a drink. As soon as I entered, I noticed that all the cupboard doors on one wall were open, some were slightly open, while others were wide open. I knew that I hadn't left them that way before going to bed because I always close the doors and I like to keep things tidy. A few weeks later, I was in my home office, where there was no TV, no music, just my work computer. Suddenly, my dryer buzzer went off, and I didn't give it much thought until I realized that I hadn't done any laundry and hadn't been in the basement for at least 3 days. Normally, the buzzer only sounds once when the cycle is finished, but for 15 minutes or so, I sat there listening and staring at my office door. I knew that no one else was home, and that my cats were upstairs and not close to the basement. The following day, I was still thinking about it while chatting to my sister on FaceTime, but I forced myself to ignore it. Eventually, I made the decision to go down to the basement, where I found my washer and dryer covered in a rough, gravel-like substance. The floor above them is wooden, and there was no dirt or gravel anywhere else. It was odd, but I tried to figure out why, and I blamed my cats even though it didn't seem like their fault. A week later, while I was working in my office, I heard a noise from the front of the house. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to get my attention. Curious, I got up and went to the living room, where I noticed something odd. My attic door was open at 6 o'clock. The door is always closed and latched, and I hadn't touched it. Trying not to think too much, I pushed it shut, made sure it was locked in place, and returned to my desk. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard another noise. As I made my way back to the living room, I noticed that the attic door was open once more. I was uneasy because there was no reason for it to open on its own, especially not twice in a row. I made sure the door was securely latched before leaving for work, making sure that no windows or doors were open to prevent a draft. My cats were with me in the office, so they couldn't have touched the attic door. However, yesterday, when I got home, I noticed that my front door, which I never use, was slightly open. I checked everything carefully, and the handle and screen door were both locked. I live alone with my cats, and they aren't opening doors, but I do feel like I'm not alone in this house. My landlord is friendly, so I asked him about the history of the place, and he told me that no one has ever died there. It was his family home, and he inherited it. He also told me that no previous tenant had ever mentioned anything odd, which made me wonder if I'm just dreaming or overanalyzing. There was a lot of snow in the UK's north in March. I decided that I didn't need to clean the entire windshield because I had not used it all day, so I just scraped off a small section of ice from the area where I would see clearly while driving. A few minutes later, I locked my car and went into the grocery store, which is a small store on a busy crossroads that leads to 4 different areas. Occasionally, there are really good deals, so I looked around what started as a quick trip to buy some fizzy. I was not working that day, and everything was covered in a thick layer of snow and ice when I looked outside at 8:30. Pop ended with me leaving the store with my hands full, so the shop assistant helped me open the door. Now normally he would help me get to my car, but tonight he was busy and almost ready to close up the shop. I decided to make things easier by unlocking my car door from inside the store so I could quickly go to my car. I thought this would save time, but it turned out to be one of my first mistakes. When I unlocked the car, all the lights suddenly switched on because it was very dark outside at first. I was happy about the bright lights since the car park had no other lights. As I walked to my car, I saw two men running from one side of the crossroads toward the shop. I didn't think much of it and opened the driver's door. I started putting my shopping into the passenger seat. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone running past me. I assumed it was one of the men who wanted to get inside the shop to escape the cold. I got into my car, closed the door, and was about to start the engine when I heard a knock on the passenger window. I looked over and saw a middle-aged man with a huge smile just staring at me. His eyes were fixed on me in a way that made me feel uneasy. I hurriedly put the vehicle in reverse as the guy started laughing loudly and continued tugging on the door handle as if he believed it would open if he pushed hard enough. However, as soon as I did, the parking sensors began beeping loudly, and I looked at the rearview mirror when I noticed the second man blocking my path. I was completely trapped, and the only way out was to drive backward, but I was too scared to do so because I had left my phone at home, and the shop was only a few minutes away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of the car, and the man on the left side of my car kept pulling the door handles and had begun banging on the windows. He looked increasingly irate, and his eyes were fixed on me the entire time. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang, and I turned to see that the man on my left had just kicked off one of my side mirrors. That was it, and I knew I had to do whatever it took to get out of there. So I quickly put the car in reverse and hit the gas. The man behind my car jumped out of the way as I turned, but now the other man was standing right in front of me. I wasn't going to let him stop me. I aimed the car straight at him and drove forward. At the last second, he jumped aside, and I sped out of the parking lot, racing back home as fast as I could. Since my car was easy to recognize, I decided to park a little farther from my house. I didn't want them to figure out where I lived. If they had followed me as I got out to check if my side mirror could be fixed, I noticed something worse. My front tire had been slashed with a knife and was completely flat. A chill ran through me as I thought about what could have happened since he damaged my car. I don't think they were trying to steal it, but when they saw the lights turn on, they probably thought I was an easy target alone in a dark parking lot with nowhere to go. Now I'm more careful than ever. I only unlock my car when I'm standing right next to it, and I've changed the settings so only the driver's door unlocks. I always check my surroundings before getting in, and I never sit in my car for too long after parking. Most importantly, I never go to that shop after dark anymore. No matter how short the trip, I won't take the risk again.